Okay, so what we're going to need to make our sweet little spider web is some scissors for cleaning up at the end, the actual embroidery floss that we're going to be using to create the web itself, and I've used a sort of shiny metallic. It's a grey that almost looks browny beige. It's quite a lovely colour, but I'm not sure whether that's actually going to show up on screen or not. But I wanted something that you'd be able to see against the white paper. So if I was actually doing this white on white, then you wouldn't be able to see that, so it wouldn't be a very helpful tutorial. So we'll be using some embroidery floss. We've got a hand needle, make it an embroidery needle so that hopefully you can see through that. It's got quite a large eye because we're going to be working with 6 strands of the embroidery floss at a time. I've got some standard floss which I'll be using. Well, you won't see this in the final piece, but it's there to keep the embroidery floss on the actual paper we're using, and a pencil to draw the design. Now in this case I'm going to be using some standard A4 paper. It's not special paper, it's any paper you get with a printer, and I'm just going to draw on. I'm going to do a small one so that you can actually see hopefully the whole process from beginning to end, and it won't take a lifetime for me to film. Because once I start doing the buttonhole stitch, you don't want to be sitting there even through a fast forwarded version of me doing it. So we'll just draw on a simple spider web. And then the loops. I'm not even sure if you can see me drawing this. But here we have the simple spider web. It can be any kind of freehand, and even though this line is a bit wonky, we don't have to follow this line. We can correct that because the paper will be taken away after we finish sewing. And what we need to do now is fold the paper so that we've got several layers underneath this particular piece. So what I'm going to do is just cut across the bottom, straight across the width of the paper, and then fold that under so that there are at least 3 layers of paper, so that we can sew through those 3 layers, just to give us something that's a little bit sturdier to hold on to, because this is what we're going to be working on. First thing we need to do now is get a nice length, and we want a lot of this now, of floss. And we'll thread our needle not with the floss but with the basic sewing thread. And we can knot this. We're not fussed about knots. We're not trying to do anything clever or hidden. We just need a way of attaching our embroidery floss to the paper. And one last thing before I start is I'm actually going to make some pinholes through all the layers of the paper. Now be careful you don't stab your fingers with the needle. Try and be aware of the holes, because this is where we're going to be sewing through. So you just pick a few, probably at the end of each of the web strings is a good place. So you start and come up through the hole that you've created. I'm starting at one end because what we want is to lay the thread down and sew it into place. So the knot will hold that securely on the reverse. Find the end of our floss and we'll sew that into place. Now I'm going to loop it back on itself slightly so that I don't have any raw ends showing. And I'm actually going to go through that loop to start off with so that it holds it in place. And when I come down to the next piece, making sure that's slightly long enough, I'm going to come up at the next hole. And then capture that end just there. And then sew back down. And what we want to do is to try and keep this as taut as possible with the embroidery thread just at the beginning. Everything else will even out, but to start off we want that nice and taut. And then we simply work our way through all of the needle holes that we've already created, and we attach and get it the right side of my thread, and then we can attach the the embroidery floss to the paper. So here we have the finished placement of the original embroidery floss. Now each of these loops on the end I always think makes it look like it's got more dimension in the finished piece, because it gives it more of a teardrop effect on the end. And then I've left a tail here which we can either snip off or tie back in as we progress with completing the item or completing the spider web. Now the next part that we're going to do is create the loops. These are going to be quite delicate compared to the bulk of the main spider web stems. I'm not quite sure what the technical term is for one of these pieces of the structure of the spider web. If anybody knows, pop it in a comment. I might as well learn something new while I'm teaching you a new technique. And for this piece we're just going to need one of the strands of 6 floss. So taking a piece that I already have, we'll split this into 1 out of 6 strands. Except all my nails broke off yesterday, so I'm a bit fumbly today because I'm not used to not having any nails yet. So here we have our single strand of floss. And we'll just thread that on. Now this one we're not going to tie off in a complicated fashion, we're just going to tie it around one of these stitches. Now if you want to see from the back, this is what it looks like on the back. We don't really care what it looks like because all of this is going to be cut away, but this is the stitching in between where each of these threads are held on. So it's stitched through the paper, and then you move along the back of the paper to the next pre-perforated hole that we created to actually create the structure on the front. So I'm just going to slip through and around a couple of times, just so it gives me some strength, a bit of stability. And then we're going to be working with buttonhole stitch. So what we're going to do is go under the embroidery floss, above the paper. We're not going through the paper anymore, the paper's just there to hold it. And then you pick a side and pop the thread through the loop. Now you'll have many opportunities to do this particular stitch. So we go under and then through that loop. I'll do that one more time before I create the loop. Under, through the loop, and now we're going to create that dropped loop. So we're just going to come across to the other side, to the next strand of the web. And we're not going to pull this tight. I'm going to leave it so that it has some drop to it. Now hopefully it will be an organic drop, as long as we manage to keep it loose. So again, we'll go under and then through the loop for the buttonhole stitch. Now if we pull it too tight, as you can see, that just goes straight across. We don't want that. We want to loosen that up so that it gives us a droop. So you need to play around with that slightly until you're comfortable with the drop that you've achieved, which is why I say that the lines are there for an indication of what we're doing rather than exactly what we're doing. So if you're happy with that level of drop or droop, just pop another one in. Another buttonhole stitch just to hold that in place. You want to try and keep all of these little taggy bits of thread ends. We want to get those tied inside the buttonhole stitches as well. And then through the loop. So there is a bit of a droop, and we're going to do that again all the way across. So we'll keep going all the way through. So we've done a few more now, so you can see that we've got the loops coming through. They are slightly more organic in nature. So we just, when we've come to an end, we simply move down to the next point, keeping our thread under that knot, then knotting it off once with the buttonhole stitch, and then coming across, making sure that it's not too tight, and then closing that off with a buttonhole stitch. Now, if you over tighten, you can loosen it up, but really I find that if I hold it with my thumbnail, hold the little thread that I want to keep loose with my thumbnail, and then pull to tighten it, I've still got a little bit of give and flexibility here after I've tied that knot. And I tie one below and one above each stitch, just so that it's got some position held. So we'll move across to the next one. We go underneath, try not to catch the other pieces, comes underneath. Now this one's going to be slightly trickier because it's a very small stitch, so I definitely need to hold this with my nail. Definitely need to hold that there, and then thread under and tie off with the knot with the buttonhole stitch, which in effect is a knot, and then go above where it's attached to the card or attached to the paper, and do another buttonhole stitch above, which I then pull down. Oh, and we mustn't loop through other threads, otherwise we get this nasty effect. So we'll unpick that and then resew. And one of the reasons that I don't film and take out all the mistakes is so that you can actually see how to fix those mistakes. If I make them, you can make them. We're all human. Lots of mistakes to be made in life, but if we don't know how to fix them, then we're in a lot more difficulty than we necessarily need to be. So we'll keep this piece over here out of the way and go under and through to create a buttonhole stitch, and then we pull that down so that it's one below and one above where this thread has been attached to the paper. We'll do the same over here, so we'll go below, there's the stitch, we'll go below that, we'll keep that held tight with my nail, and then go under to create the buttonhole stitch, and then we'll create a buttonhole stitch above, like so, and then pull it down so that it's close to that stitch. And I'll just do another 1, 2, 3 to finish off and be back. Now here's our somewhat messy looking, I think you'll agree, spider web, but this is the point where we now start to really smarten it up and make it look really impressive, and actually gives it the strength and structure to be able to be used elsewhere once we've removed the paper from it. So still on the back, we haven't touched the back since we've sewn on the original pieces. All the work that we did was on the front, and all the work that we continue to do now will be on the front. You shouldn't have any stitches going through the paper. If you've had something go through the paper, unthread the needle, remove those stitches and start again so that you're not going through the paper. It's quite important, otherwise you won't be able to remove the paper at the end to reveal your beautiful web. So the next stage is yet again working with a single piece of floss. So again, my fumbling fingers. It's quite ridiculous how losing your fingernails makes everything so much more difficult. What I'm going to be doing at this point now to neaten and strengthen this is to use buttonhole stitch along the length of each of these arms of the spider web. The actual lacy pieces in between each of the arms will be left as they are, so that they can hopefully loop and flow in a slightly more organic fashion, but the rest of it will be given strength and structure. I don't use knots at this point. I simply incorporate the leftover pieces into the buttonhole stitch, including the tail of the piece that I'm using to create the buttonhole stitch. So I'll be starting up at the end. You go underneath but not through the paper, so it's underneath the underneath the original floss, but not through the paper. And what we want to be doing at this point, so I'm going to leave my tail, is to go back under, and you're going to be going through. This is what's going to create all that neatness. And this is quite a long-winded process, but it is really worth it. The end result is gorgeous. And so we pull that one tight, and then we work our way down the length of that arm. So buttonhole stitch after buttonhole stitch after buttonhole stitch, and you just keep going. And whilst this looks very cat-handed, because I'm trying to do this around a camera, and my thread wants to twist in the opposite direction. There we go. So I'll show you again. You have a loop over the top. You put your needle underneath so that it's coming out through the loop, and then pull it tight. And then pull it tight. One more time, if we can get the thread to go in the right direction. So you loop over the top of the thread. You put your needle underneath the thread, taking care not to stab yourself here. It's very easy to stab yourself there when you're doing this. And then pull that tight, and we want to keep all of these threads up at the same point. Now I'll do a few more and then show you what that actually looks like. I'm going to try and do this slightly closer up for you so that you can really see what's going on. And here we have a row of the buttonhole stitch, and as you can see, that's starting to make the whole thing look a lot neater now. So just see if I can do this so that you can see it a lot more closely, and then I'll show you the finished piece. So we have the thread coming out the top. I slide the needle underneath, lift that up so that it goes over the top of the thread, and what I find helpful is to hold this back and then pull this up towards the top, which allows that buttonhole to then sit back in place. So I'll try this one more time, slightly further away so I've got room to move. So I'll hold everything down. I loop it over my finger to give me some space. I then hold it with my thumb. Can you see that? Yes, so I loop it over my finger so that I've got clear space to work in. Hold it with my thumb to keep that thread out of the way, and then I pop the thread underneath. It is automatically coming up through the middle of that loop because of the way I've got my fingers held, which means that I can then just release everything from around my fingers and pull that loop tight. So again, it goes under my finger, and then I hold it with my thumb, and then I just take that straight through the gap that I've created in that enormous loop, and then pull it tight. And here we are back with the finished web. It just needs to be taken off of the paper now. So as you can see, all of these pieces have been tidied up, and we now have the long pieces of thread in between, which when we position this on whatever we're going to use it for, will actually start to drape. So we can either rip this apart, or we can snip away the threads that we used to hold it onto the paper in the first place. Now I prefer to just snip away rather than ripping everything, just in case anything gets caught. Scissors are excellent for this, or indeed a seam ripper if you have one. Now I don't have a seam ripper to hand, so I shall be using my craft scissors. Just make sure that you don't actually catch your own fingers at any point whilst doing this. And once they're all cut away, you can remove it from the front of the paper. Gently take it off the front. Now, if you've created this in a strong fashion. It means that you'd be able to reuse exactly the same pattern. So you could come up with something or a series of identical webs if you wanted to. And what we need to do is now take off these little pieces of the original thread, get rid of those, which will then reveal the actual web that we've created. And here you have rather a delicate embellishment that you can use as a spider web. So hopefully that will have given you some inspiration. If we pop that back onto a piece of white paper, you can see it more clearly. And as you will be stitching, sewing this into place, you can align it as you want, and then have the delicate threads coming down in between as you want them to be arranged. So you can untwist them slightly where you've pulled them from the paper, and then you'll be able to move those around, and you can create something as large or as small as you want, to go into corners, to go onto collars, and you can do them in any colour that you like. And that's how you create a spider's web from fabric threads. Hopefully this has been of use to you and will have given you some inspiration. It takes a while to do, but I think once you've got the hang of it, you can come up with some really quite stunning embellishments for all sorts of garments, whether they're Halloween-y, or you can create leaves and all sorts of things for other times of the year. I think they're quite stunning, and they're relaxing and fun to make. Once you've got into your rhythm, then doing those buttonhole stitches are nice and easy. So if you like this, then share it around, give us a comment. Thumbs up is always great, and please, if you've managed to create one of these and you want to use it in something, I'd love to see a photo. So share it on the Facebook page, or drop me an email, or stick it on a comment somewhere. That would be fab. I'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.